All right, everyone, I think we can get going. Thank you all for being here. Hope you're enjoying your Friday afternoon in Aspen. My name is Liz Kreutz. I'm a correspondent at NBC News, reporting for The Today Show, Nightly News, MSNBC, and our streaming platforms. I am based in Los Angeles and cover a lot of climate issues, so I'm very excited about this panel today. We are going to leave time for questions at the end. We do encourage questions, not comments, so just keep that in mind as you brainstorm what you might want to ask at the end of our conversation here. I think we all know that climate change is a major global problem that we need to address urgently. One of the major solutions to that is to get to the root of the problem, greenhouse gas emissions, and this transition then to clean energy. But with that transition, not all the solutions there are clean cut, no pun intended. You can get a lot of issues in terms of land use issues, equity and environmental issues that arise, economic job losses. So to break down all of these challenges and tensions that we have to grapple with as we make this transition, I have my lovely panel of guests here, of experts. First, Colorado Senator John Hickenlooper. Thank you for welcoming us to your great state of Colorado. Also, yes. Also, of course, the former governor of this state. And fun fact about the senator, he began his career as a geologist. So I know these issues have always been of interest to you. In the middle here, we have Robert Kenney, president of Xcel Energy's Colorado operating system, which provides electric utility and natural gas to millions of customers in Colorado. In this role, you're deeply involved with policy decisions, working with the community to try to make this clean energy transition. And prior to this, you were vice president at PG&E, or a vice president there, which is one of California's major energy providers. And last but not least, we have former Ambassador Mark Nathanson. Just as of a few months ago, you were our ambassador to Norway from 2002 to 2024. So welcome back stateside. And I'm fascinated to talk to you because I know in this role, you were able to see how Norway and other countries implemented their own shift to clean energy. You're also an Aspen Institute trustee and a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. So thank you all for being here. Before we get going, though, I do feel like, Senator, I do want to ask you your reaction to the debate. 4 years ago, you were on the debate stage with President Biden. Is this the same President Biden you debated with 4 years ago?
I knew that question was going to come up, and I knew I wouldn't want to answer it.
Had to ask.
It was a bad debate. Yeah. But I don't think that discounts for the most successful years we've seen any president have, and he has to be contrasted with somebody who told, according to CNN, 40 lies in the course of that 90 minutes, is a convicted felon and is an insurrectionist. So while I'm disappointed in the debate, I still, if President Trump continues on and decides to continue running, I will support him 100%.
You mean President Biden?
President Biden.
I said,
You said President Trump.
Now you made news. And see how easy those slip-ups can occur.
Yes, it's true. Fair. So you're saying if, you did use the word if, though, if he continues. So that's like you're opening the door that there is a chance he could step aside.
Well, there's a lot of pressure on him to do that, but I'm not, certainly the remarks I saw the clips today where he was talking about how he's learned over his life when you get knocked down, you get up and you persevere and you win.
Ambassador, I know you're a supporter. Do you want to weigh in on this?
Well, I work for him right now. I'm working on the campaign.
Yes.
So that's my current job. That's why I left Norway. And I thought it was a disastrous performance. Joe Biden on one-on-one, as John knows, is very into issues, very alert, very sharp. Somehow last night he wasn't. Mm-hmm. And that's just how it was.
Yeah.
All right, we can transition now to our clean energy discussion here, clean energy transition.
Robert, they did ask you.
Oh, yeah, okay, so I apologize.
Okay.
Do you want to wait?
No, it's fine.
Come on, Robert, what did you think, really? Come on, Robert.
I will say this. The macro political environment shows itself in these climate discussions that we're having, and all of the issues that you just described, what we're seeing on the macro level in terms of the polarization and the lack of civil discourse implicates the work that we're doing. Mm-hmm. How's that?
Absolutely. Thank you. Sorry,
That's just what I was going to say about the debate.
All right. So, Senator, let's talk big picture now about the state of climate, the state of our globe. How bad is it and how urgent is our shift to clean energy? And are we even remotely close to getting where we need to be?
So first, it is bad. It's probably worse than what most people realize. It's disturbing to me that there are still so many people in this country, but in the Senate, who say, well, it's not that bad, and the effects aren't aren't that serious, because this is something that's going to, it's a cumulative effect, and it will have an exponential growth at a certain point. And we already see the extreme weather events, the wildfires after the incredible droughts. People who live in many of the foothills in Colorado can't get home insurance anymore. The floods after these hurricanes come forward, the rising seas. I mean, there are estimates that as many as 1.2 million people could be forced out of their traditional homes by 2050. And they're going to have to move somewhere, and that's going to create a disruption. The costs of this are staggering, and every month, every year that goes by, it's increasing the severity of what we're going to have to pay to get to balance the scales. And I got to Washington. I'd say my biggest disappointment, my biggest surprise is how much I like being in the Senate, because it is, after you've been a mayor and a governor and you're used to having that cadence of decisions and the authority, to be one of 100 is a different role, and it's about deep relationships and going deeper on a smaller number of issues. But there's no business plan laid out for how we're going to address climate change. I thought the Department of Energy or the Department of Commerce or some of the larger environmental nonprofits, they would have business plans with some flexibility, but here's where we're going to need more copper, here's a bottleneck for electric vehicles. There's no place I can find a coherent business plan. And that should concern us, because we're going to have to make sacrifices as a country. I mean, I think of it as a great transition, because we have to deal with it, and we're going to look back 100 years from now, and we are right now in the very beginnings of this great transition. And the things that a business plan would help us with, which is the supply chains necessary for the different materials, copper, lithium, cobalt. You go down, whether you're talking about wind energy or solar energy, there are all kinds of minerals that we don't have enough of here, and we don't have a reliable supply side or supply delivery system from our allies.
We're going to dig into that issue, absolutely, as the panel gets going. Robert, I want to bring you in here. Xcel Energy provides energy not just to Coloradans, but millions of people across the country, 8 states. The company has a vision of being a net zero energy provider by 2050. Given that goal, what are some of the biggest challenges you're facing as an energy provider right now and to get there?
Some of what the senator just described. So we do operate in 8 states. Colorado is our largest of those 8 states. We are right now here in Colorado deploying wind and solar paired with storage. We just had recently approved at our commission about 5,600 megawatts of new renewables, and that's 5,600 megawatts on a 7,200 megawatt system. So our net zero vision contemplates that we will reduce carbon emissions by 80% from 2005 levels by 2030 and be 100% carbon free by 2050. And so we're decarbonizing all the major sectors over which we have some control, and that's the electric sector, and we are well on our way to that 80% by 2030. We're at 50-some-odd% now, emission reductions. We're also reducing emissions from our natural gas system, so we still do have a natural gas system for home heating and cooking. We have a clean heat plan in Colorado that requires us to reduce methane emissions from our natural gas system, and then we're helping to catalyze transportation electrification, because tailpipe emissions are the second largest emitter of carbon emissions. And so our goal is to have 1 in 5 vehicles in our service territory electric, and we're building the infrastructure to be able to enable that. And so some of the challenges that we're seeing right now are supply chain related issues, because we source materials from foreign countries. One of the projects that maybe we'll talk about is a project that we have down in Pueblo that doesn't rely upon rare earth minerals from other countries that we're really excited about. I think the other challenge is the variability of renewable resources and what is our dispatchable baseload resource going to be, whether that's natural gas or nuclear or long duration storage. So lots of challenges, but we're making significant progress. I think 2030 is achievable, and we've got 2030 clearly in our sights. 2050 is going to require a lot of work and a lot of effort.
Ambassador, give us the big picture, global perspective from your time overseas in Norway. What did you see there? Norway is known for being a country that's leading the way with renewables. What did you see there that you feel we should be doing here in the U.S. that we're not doing?
Well, almost the opposite of what John said that he found in the Senate in Washington. The Norwegians have a real plan that has totally united all the parties, from the the Labour Party to the Conservative Party, they have all agreed on the green transition. But remember, Norway is the richest country in Europe because of fossil fuels, and the only major provider of fossil fuels of European countries. So they have an impetus to make that transition, which they are planning to do. Equinor, which is the big state-owned 67%, even though it's a public company, 67% owned by the state, is really very, very progressive in what it's doing with wind, with carbon, with other things. Their electrical is hydro, 90% are from water, and it is very progressive. 70% of all cars in Norway are electrical. All new cars, new trucks, the government is pushing to have them be electrical by giving incentives when I say the government is pushing. So we're talking about a country, even though it's a small country, only 5.5 million people, but if you look at all the Nordics, you would see 70 million, you'd see a very similar pattern. They believe we must make changes, and it affects not only the climate, but the whole global political situation around the world.
Interesting. So by show of hands here of you three, how many of you believe that we need to have permitting reform here in the U.S. in order to get where we need to go? All three of you? What does that look like? What kind of reform are you calling for?
On all levels, and it's, I was thinking of this panel when we first were coming up with the idea. I thought it should be called Strange Bedfellows, because if you believe in climate change, and I think most people that believe in science and facts are seriously concerned by climate change, you've got to take the environmental community, which has for a long time really invested in slowing down infrastructure, building, construction. Mm-hmm. And yet, if we're going to get the minerals we need, and if we're going to be able to get the clean energy from where it's developed to where it's needed, and so you have to build transmission lines, we're spending 20 or 22 years applying for permits to get these transmission lines to move green electricity from one place to another. We don't have 22 years just to go through the permit process. So that's why the environmental community kind of has to sit down with the people, the electrical utilities or the mining companies, and reach common ground the way Norway. It sounds like Norway is a good textbook model of how to do this, but we've got to get the alignment of self-interest. That's when good things happen, is when we can get to I just call it the alignment of self-interest, where everyone's got their self-interest and they're working towards this goal, and it's not what they originally thought it is. They've moved it a little bit so that they're more in line with everyone else.
Robert, did you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I'd say alignment of self-interest and maybe the disregard of self-interest as well, in looking at the bigger picture. I think permitting reform, I know we just had a nuclear plant that was completed that was over budget and over time in Georgia. That's where I think we might need some assistance with permitting. And I won't talk about transmission lines and whether the federal government should preempt the state government, because I served as a state public utility regulator for 6 years, and as a state public utility regulator, you were loath to invite the federal government in to usurp your jurisdiction, your authority.
So was I, until I became
a federal government official, I'm sure. But it's true that we're going to need transmission built, and I think the senator also touched on the fact that there's no national blueprint. In the absence of that, all of this is happening at the state. And so we actually are building a 600-mile, 345 kV high-voltage transmission line that's going to harness wind and solar on the eastern plains and bring it to load centers. And we've had challenges with our communities and with some local governmental entities, but we've done a lot of stakeholdering ahead of time to be able to mitigate some of the challenges that we face with NIMBYism.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to add one point. Yeah. Before I was in government, I invested and were involved with companies that were very environmentally sensitive. We owned the patents for water-free urinals, low-flush toilets, and so forth. Obviously, when I went into government, I had to leave those investments. But my point is, I found the environmental organizations the activists, as well as the companies, if you could bring them together in the beginning to have a dialogue, we could accomplish what John was talking about. Yeah. I think there's a real possibility that we could get together and change the energy direction of this country.
Before we talk about some of those complications and trade-offs, I do want to also say I feel like there's an urgency to do this transition from a climate perspective and also this national security perspective with China's dominance in this space. I mean, 80% of the world's solar panels are manufactured in China, 60% of its electric vehicles, and more than 80% of its electric vehicle batteries. So, Senator, can you talk about China's dominance here and how concerning that is?
So China's obviously our most serious rival. Adversary might be too strong a word, but certainly their self-interest is not clearly aligned on most issues with ours, and this becomes painfully evident when you look at how we source these critical minerals. So lithium, cobalt, nickel, copper. China is going out, and they control many of these products. We wrote down some of it in they have 70% of the rare earth element production and 90% of the processing. 80 and 90% of the germanium. I mean, you go down, they spent $60 to $100 billion in lithium-ion batteries, building a supply chain. And what happens? Well, in Australia, they were opening a large nickel mine, and then right before they were about to go public, suddenly the market was flooded. China and some of the Chinese-owned companies in other parts of the world flooded the mineral market, and the prices dropped, and so the Australian company couldn't open. They couldn't get loans. They couldn't get investors. And we've seen that happen with a bunch of different, it's not just nickel, it's all kinds of these critical minerals.
Right, and Ambassador, I mean, there's this tension here because if we try to limit bringing in solar panels from China in order to have solar panels made in America, it raises the cost. Less people might install solar, and then we have less clean energy. So there's this tricky trade-off here. How do you grapple with that?
I think the way to deal with it, and we in the United States must recognize this, is we need to have special critical mineral agreements with certain countries in the world. Canada, obviously, being very important. Norway is the third largest in critical minerals. And I think that these agreements are very important. Both Senator Wyden and his Republican counterpart on the Finance Committee are for this. But these agreements have been bogged down, and they have not been signed. There have been problems with past agreements. Senator Wyden feels that we made with Japan, for example. We're still negotiating with the EU. But I think these agreements with friendly allies are critical, and joint ventures between American companies and these friendly ally countries in this whole area of precious minerals, critical minerals, can be done, but we have to move on it quickly. And it's still being bogged down both in Congress and at the White House.
Robert, you're nodding. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Oh, a lot, yeah. Because we have long lead time items that we need to be able to procure. So it's not just the critical minerals that go into the lithium-ion batteries, but it's large transformers, conductor. We're looking at 4 to 5 years to get transmission level transformers. And that will slow down our ability to deploy wind and solar. I would love to see a couple of things. Significant investment in R&D in different types of technologies that would make us less reliant on lithium-ion in the first place. And so we have a battery that we're deploying in Pueblo that is an iron-air battery, and I will very quickly exhaust my scientific knowledge of how it works, but it basically rusts and derusts, and it's 100 hours, and so it's going to solve a couple of different problems. It'll make wind and solar more dispatchable, because all of our batteries now are typically 4 to 6 hours. They're not long enough to really make wind and solar dispatchable. So it solves that problem. But the iron that's in the battery is something that's plentiful in the United States, and we wouldn't have to source lithium-ion from other countries. So the company that we're working with is called Form. They've just set up a manufacturing plant in West Virginia. So we're piloting this down in Pueblo, and if it proves out to be that type of good technology that's dispatchable for 100 hours, that's an area where I'd love to see us be able to scale that. The second thing, I'd love to see some type of CHIPS Act for transformers and long lead time equipment to be able to manufacture that stuff in the United States rather than having to go overseas to source those materials. So that's a plug, Senator, for you.
Yes, Senator, what do you...
I caught that.
Are those areas that you think the government's looking into and things that you would be open to exploring?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of the problem, dysfunction is endemic in Washington right now, and it is almost a sport, a body sport, a body contact sport where people are trying to actually take down someone on the other side, even if what they're proposing is beneficial to the country or the state where the other senator is from. I think we've got to get that alignment of self-interest and look at how do we get that research? The CHIPS Plus Science, I chaired the Science Plus Space. Yes, this is really contagious, I guess. The Space Plus Science Committee, when that CHIPS Plus Science Act was going forward, and it's amazing the amount of effort goes in trying to assess where do you get the maximum benefit for every dollar? It's just an enormous amount of work. But what Robert's describing is essential. We need to double the workforce to do mining and get a lot of these critical minerals, and yet that's doubled it over the next 5 years. And over the last 3 years, it's decreased by 40%. So in other words, young people aren't going into being mining engineers or these types of industrial engineers.
Interesting. Well, one of the challenges as we do begin to mine is this idea of the land that we choose to do it on. And I was reading a report from the Indian Energy Minerals Forum. It found that 97% of nickel, 89% of copper, 79% of lithium, and 89% of cobalt are all potentially within 35 miles of Indian reservations here in the U.S. Those are pretty stunning numbers. That means there's an economic opportunity for indigenous communities, but also there's a chance that they feel like their land is being encroached upon and stolen. So, Robert, do you want to weigh in on this? Because I know that's something you're dealing with in the community.
Yeah, I mean, we've had to be appropriately sensitive to a couple of tribes, the Cheyenne and the Arapaho tribes, in the Sand Creek Massacre site, which is a very sacred site where we are building infrastructure nearby. And we knew going into that we needed to be sensitive to that. And so we started... we had an electric resource plan that we were going to file in 2018. We started in 2016 to reach out to the tribe proactively, and I think that was what the ambassador was alluding to earlier, the need to reach out to communities in advance, proactively, not waiting until the plan is already fully baked. We're citing some of our transmission lines that are in close proximity to the Sand Creek Massacre site, and being sensitive to that fact, we had engagement with both tribes very early on, and we're able to come to resolution about how far outside of the viewshed we would build that infrastructure. And it required us to be willing to listen, to proactively reach out. I think the same is true if we're going to extract critical minerals from sacred lands. I think we just have to do exactly that, reach out as early as possible, and engage in authentic two-way dialogue, not bring a fully baked plan to a community and say, here's what we're about to do.
Ambassador, there was actually a situation in Norway that's interesting. This is a global problem, a situation in Norway where Europe's largest onshore wind farm is on indigenous land where it's used for reindeer herding. How did they deal with this there?
The Sami people, which are the indigenous people, who are not just in Norway and are traditionally reindeer herders, but they move the reindeer without borders of countries. And this involves both Russia, Finland, Sweden, and Norway. So it's a very complicated situation because of our hostilities with Putin's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, which Russia borders Norway in the north. But as I said, the Norwegian government is very sensitive to this and has early on been dealing with these people about wind, about other areas. There have been lawsuits filed by indigenous people to slow down in certain areas what I call wind farms. But they have come up with compromise. That is a little different in Norway, I found, than in the United States. We're a little more litigious here, and we aren't as into let's work this out and settle it. Not that there aren't lawsuits and plenty of lawyers there. Don, I don't want to insult the legal profession. So I'm just saying to you, I think we have to look at the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is we cannot be, as the senator just said, so dependent on China. And all the European countries that we talk to and the ambassadors are aware of this, and we have to move forward. The big controversy is going to be in seabed mining.
Why do you say that?
Because it's very sensitive to the environment. And to do it right without disturbing the oceans, which John can tell you have been so disturbed by plastics and other things, we have to do mining that is safe and helpful and does not hurt the natural environment of the ocean. But there's enormous minerals there that we are now almost solely dependent on China.
So, Senator, how do you accomplish this mining in the ocean without destroying the ecosystem?
I think that this is a different mindset. I think it's happening globally, where we are raising the standards of social and environmental responsibility. So that if you're going to go into build a mine in Indonesia or Chile or Nevada or in the deep ocean, you're going to be held to a high standard of how are you going to measure the environmental conditions existing, and then how are you going to be able to retrieve the minerals you're going after without disturbing that environment in a negative way. And in many remote places, as you described earlier, the indigenous peoples are going to be connected to this, and there have to be, let's call them beneficial projects, but things that where they come out of this coming out better, and that their traditions and spiritual values are respected and accommodated in the entire process. And that's not the way it's always happened in the past. And yet we've been meeting with some of the CEOs of the largest mining companies and looking at some of the largest environmental companies or organizations and trying to, how do we align and figure out a new way we can all agree on this stuff? Because we're talking about climate change, right? We should all have that common alignment.
There's a situation in California right now, in Southern California, where thousands of Joshua trees are likely going to be bulldozed over and taken out in order to put in a massive solar farm. It's pitting environmentalists against environmentalists. How do you decide if that, should we be this will allow thousands of homes to be powered by solar, but you're also destroying these beautiful trees?
Right. Well, I would argue that without a business plan, those are very hard decisions to make. The more you can get to a plan of we're going to get this energy from this source and in this geographic region, and this energy from this source in this geographic region, then you can balance what's the cost benefit. I've read about that, and that's going to go down as a major battle. It is.
Are these situations here in Colorado that you're grappling with?
The one I just described with the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes with our Power Pathway is one example. I don't know the specifics of that, so I don't want to comment on what that developer did or did not do, but that seems like that's an opportunity that's ripe for some type of advanced discussion, because these projects are multiple years in the planning, and there's a lot of opportunity up front to either change the route of your transmission line, find a different place for the land. I'm certain that there are really rich solar resources near where the Joshua trees are, but it just causes me to wonder if there was an opportunity some amount of time in advance of actually having a fully baked plan where they could have talked with the community and potentially found another place. So we do see those things, but we are able to minimize that to the greatest degree possible by interacting with the community well in advance.
Ambassador, do you have something? I saw you nodding that you wanted to weigh in.
Well, I was recently, when I was in Norway, at a conference of indigenous people from all over the world, including from Alaska. And they were talking about how some of this have affected their lands. But I was very surprised they were not negative, because it created jobs in very poverty-restricted areas in the past. But we have to be extremely sensitive to the environmental issues that you've been talking about.
I want to transition to jobs and this idea of transitioning fossil fuel jobs to clean energy jobs. A survey from the U.S. Berkeley Labor Center looked at a specific refinery in the San Francisco Bay Area that abruptly closed a few years ago. About 350 union fossil fuel workers lost their jobs. And this survey found that a year after that closure, 26% of those that were laid off were still unemployed. And even of those that had found new jobs, many said it came at a cost of much lower wages and worse working conditions. Many had to tap into their retirement savings to make ends meet. I did speak to some of those workers, and it's very clear that some of them feel like it's lip service when they are told that fossil fuel jobs are going to turn into clean energy. What can you tell them, and how can you make sure there really is this transition?
Well, we're in grave danger of repeating the tragedy that happened when globalization took so many factory jobs out of America and moved them to Asia, one part or another of Asia. And we should know better. Maya Angelou said, I did the best I could when I knew. When I know more, I do better. We have to do better. And part of that is accelerating the rate at which we are building the infrastructure, the transmission lines, the kinds of jobs that do require highly compensated employees and oftentimes similar skills to what they had working in the oil fields or getting hydrocarbons out of the ground. And that opportunity to build solar fields, to take care of solar fields once they're up, to build wind turbines and connect them and to keep them operating, to build transmission lines, it's going to be an enormous cost. I mean, and that means an enormous number of jobs. But if we put it off 15 years and 20 years and 25 years, then many of the people who desperately need the jobs now, they're out of luck.
Right. Robert, what is being done on your end to try to help with this transition? I mean, are there certificates? I remember speaking to some of these workers who felt like their skills were transferable, but they didn't have a certificate or anything to show, I can do this, I can get this new job.
So I'm actually very proud to say that we've closed 17 coal plants, and we've not laid off a single employee. Thank you. And that's across all 8 of our states. We will close our last coal-fired plant here in Colorado in 2030. And we have 3 coal plants that we're about to close. One's in Hayden, one's in Pueblo, and one's in Pawnee. One of the coal plants will be converted to a natural gas plant. All of those employees will still have jobs. In both Hayden and Pueblo, we've started again. We talked about stakeholdering with the environmental community and other stakeholders. Your employees are also critical stakeholders. So well before we made the decision to shut down these 2 coal plants, we were in the plants talking to our coworkers to let them know what we were planning, how we were going to effectuate a just transition. And that's what we're doing. We're effectuating a just transition. And so we're shutting these coal plants down. We will either through reskilling and retraining find jobs within Excel for all of those coworkers, or if they're retirement eligible and they want to retire, they'll be able to do that. But this is something that, again, in the absence of federal policy, the states will do it, and we're doing it in all of our states where we're shutting down coal plants and finding other jobs. I think the senator is exactly right. We're going to be investing literally billions of dollars in transmission infrastructure, in renewable infrastructure, system hardening that we're doing for climate-driven wildfire prevention, billions of dollars of investment that's also going to create permanent and construction jobs. And so there's no shortage of work, and so it shouldn't be the case that anybody has to suffer because of that. The other thing I'll add, you didn't explicitly ask that, but when we retire these assets, that has property tax implications for those communities. And so we're committed to putting new resources in those communities, whether it's a renewable resource or something else. And in Pueblo in particular, if we're unable to find a resource to site there in place of that coal plant, we've committed to making 10 years of property tax payments to replace that lost income.
Ambassador, what can be done after hearing that to implement that, do you think, in more communities nationwide?
Again, using the Nordic example, and it's not the same, much smaller population than in this country, much different regulatory environment, but they have free education, totally free education all the way through medical school, law school, or whatever. However, in Norway, they're encouraging people who are interested to take a track and to go in to the green transition field, because they feel there will be so many jobs in the future. And if they can have curriculum and studies for that, then they can come to companies and be even more valuable to them. So they feel part of it is for the school system, for the state, to prepare men and women to go into this field in advance.
And that brings up the point of what a poor job this country has done in training people. And as we've worked over the last 30 years trying to make sure every kid goes from high school to college and gets a 4-year degree, and we've added another 6 or 7%. So we're now at 36% of the kids who go and graduate from college or graduate from high school in the United States actually get a 4-year college degree. The other kids are pretty much out of luck. In other words, we've cut back so much of our funding. And you look at Norway or most of the European countries, they are doing apprenticeships at a level that we only can dream about. Our apprenticeships are almost all for electricians and plumbers. Right. We need apprenticeships for all these skills they're describing. We need a centralized assessment system where we can have stackable credentials. So as kids of all ages go through life and learn new skills, they have a place online where their future employer or prospective employer can see, here's what this kid can do, here's the experience he's had, and we need those skills at this time. We've got to be much more fluid in the training and in the communication between worker and jobs. And that's something that we've got a couple bills in Washington to really begin to transform apprenticeships on a much broader scale for everything, for kids who want to go into banking or work in an insurance company or anyone. They should be able to start when they're in the 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade.
Absolutely. Okay, we have a few minutes left before we're going to open it up for questions. So I would love to have each of you go around, and I'm going to pick 2050 since that's the year that you've identified. Tell me what you hope our country looks like in 2050 in terms of where we are in this transition.
You want me first?
Go for it.
I think 2050 is going to be a huge year, and it's a great one to pick because we might not be everywhere we want to be, but we will have seen such a remarkable transformation, and it'll be almost like imagining your life before you had a cell phone, before you had these little computers that could do so many tasks that we now take for granted. We will see a different world, and I honestly believe, I'm obviously worried like anyone about artificial intelligence, other threats, but I think this new world has the potential to have plenty of jobs, a higher quality of life, a much better education system. I mean, feels sometimes from the news media, no offense, but we're not making much progress. And yet, if you step back and look at it, we've made enormous progress without actually getting where we need to be. We've got a lot to do, but we've made a lot of progress.
So I kind of alluded to it before. I said 2030, we've got a clear pathway there with existing technology, and 2050 is going to be a bit of a challenge. Having said that, I have no doubt that there will be technologies that we don't even know yet that are going to get us to that last 20% for 2050. And so I would envision a world where we have a proliferation of electric vehicles, where we have the infrastructure to eliminate range anxiety, where we have cracked the nut on the intermittent nature of solar and wind, where we have some type of dispatchable resource, either through long-duration storage with critical minerals that are sourced here. And then I think, the pace of technological change is exponential. And so my expectation is that technologies that we haven't yet even dreamed of are going to get us the rest of the way to 2050. I have all the faith in human ingenuity in the world.
Is AI going to be part of that?
I think so. I think AI is going to be a part of that. I think that one of the things that we're talking about internally are what are the appropriate use cases for artificial intelligence. And I think the other thing I'll just say is that we have to also be careful that in our speed to embrace this exciting new technology that we don't lose sight of potential unintended consequences. Mm-hmm. And so, we're very deliberate and thoughtful about where we might use artificial intelligence, not thinking about using it for running a critical nuclear plant, for instance, but how you can enhance the customer experience, how you can put more data into your customers' hands, how you can make processes more efficient. But yeah, absolutely, artificial intelligence will be a part of that too.
Interesting. All right, Ambassador.
I hate to be the negative person on the panel, but 3 months ago I was in Salzburg, the farthest north city to the Arctic, and the same thing could be said of the Antarctic, and the ice is melting in the Arctic 4 times faster than the rest of the world. It has enormous impacts, not just on the Arctic, but on the whole world. I believe, personally, what John said, and we need more people in Congress like the senator, because we need to have an overhaul of the global energy systems and policies, not just in this country, but throughout the world. And if designed properly, we can forge a new path of global stability, because energy is critical to global stability. And hopefully that will happen.
And just if I could chime into the thing, we're going to have lots of challenges. And I just found this, a young woman who has a company called Sway. But plastic is a big problem. How are we going to deal with plastic? And this is made from seaweed. Now, that's me pouring. But there you have a plastic bag completely made out of seaweed. And we can't even imagine this thing, but these are the kinds of innovations, that ingenuity that we've all been talking about, Robert was just talking about, it's here.
We just have to be able to get that at a mass scale and at a lower cost for people.
Exactly. Well, I'll tell you, it'll be, as I like to think, diplomatically more expensive, slightly more expensive, but Sway. Actually, it's swaythefuture.com. First time I've ever heard. I'm not shilling. I'm just the first time I've ever heard of it, but I thought it was amazing.
You're not an influencer hashtag ad for swag. All right, let's open it up to questions. Who has any thoughts? Right there.
Thank you very much for this panel. I actually love the fact that we talked a lot about critical minerals. I'm Eduarda Zogby. I'm an Aspen Ideas Fellow for this year, and I work for the Climate Investment Funds. But outside of my work, I've spent a good amount of time doing research on the geopolitics of critical minerals. And I'm just curious about your opinion. And as someone from South America that has been living here for a few years, I always think it's fascinating to see the relationship between US and China and the way that China is perceived for the rest of the global South. And I say this because with the IRA, there are a lot of benefits for exploring critical minerals, but that only benefits the countries that have free trade agreements with the US. So knowing that there is a growing demand for critical minerals in this country and trying to reposition yourselves geopolitically in the world, how do you see the importance of setting either new free trade agreements with other countries that have higher risks of investment, such as DRC or Bolivia, that are rich in minerals? And how do you expect in the next few years that type of relationship to be?
Who wants to jump in on that?
I'm very interested in hearing what you have to say.
So I love that question. I think if you look at the relationship between the United States and Japan and the United States and Germany, you can see that we have no permanent enemies. And I think we're open for business. And I think there is a period of rivalry that we're going through right now with China that we will hopefully grow through. And it's going to take us a while, 10, 20, I don't know. Mark might have a better idea on that. But I think we can get there. And as someone who's spent a lot of time in Latin America and loves, I think Latin America, we used to joke that we believe it's important to have a southern border, but the southern border of the United States ought to be down at the tip of Tierra del Fuego, because we share so many values, and if we were able to raise up the quality of life of Latin America, there wouldn't be the immigration issues. We'd be able to really have a hemisphere that was dynamic enough to address all the questions we've been addressing here.
I'll say, without specifically referencing free trade agreements, I do worry about the amount of investment that China is making in Africa and other parts of the world where those critical minerals lie, where we're not necessarily making the same level of investment. And I worry very much about what that will mean for our ability to access those critical minerals, but also just what it'll mean for us to maintain our global power. And that is something that does concern me.
Right.
And I would just add, with the Global South, it is critical that we have agreements and we have joint ventures with companies in this area that you're talking about. And there's no reason that we should not. We have embassies in all these countries. They are aware of it. We just have to get both Democrats and Republicans on board to do that. But I think it's critical to do that for the future.
Right, and just for the record, the Department of Commerce, the State Department, the White House are all very aware of these issues and are negotiating and working towards those kind of goals and trying to figure out how to break down the walls and increase the trade.
I think we have a question right here, but we're going to get the mic. We're coming with the mic right here.
Thank you. As an alternative to the struggle around critical minerals, I'm wondering, particularly for Mr. Kenny, are you seriously considering nuclear power to replace the coal plant in Pueblo or other places?
So I'll just answer your question. Yes, we are seriously considering it. We as a company run two nuclear plants in Minnesota. So we have the technical capability. I think to the extent that there are obstacles in Pueblo, they're twofold. There's not unanimity about whether that's a resource that the community wants. There's some parts of the community that do want to see advanced nuclear or small modular reactors. And so that is a political obstacle. The second one is that for the acquisition period where we need resources in the short term, the technology is not mature enough yet. So the small modular reactor technology, it's been used on submarines for years and years. And so it is a mature technology, but then being able to take that out of a submarine and put it into a factory to be able to deploy it locally, that's still a few years off. And so we absolutely think that nuclear is a part of our discussion in the future. Whether it will be the technology is advanced enough, it's still very nascent to be able to serve Pueblo on the timeline that we're looking at, unlikely.
And let me just say, nuclear is a very interesting subject in Europe. Norway is anti-nuclear, yet the original founder of NATO, all of the ships, 110 while I was ambassador, from America who came there, including the Gerald Ford, our largest aircraft carrier, are all nuclear, all the submarines. So I think we have to find a balance. It's safe nuclear.
I think we had a question right here.
Thank you for the thoughtful discussion. I'm just wondering, what do you guys see the role of natural gas will play in 10, 20 years, A, in developed countries, and to B, in developing countries? Especially now, developing countries are still heavily relying on coal, so will nat gas be a stopgap measure until they transition to renewable, or they will go straight to renewable? What do you guys think?
Well, I'll take a stab at that. I mean, we see it right here in Colorado, where we are still using some natural gas. We're using it significantly less. So we're retiring our coal. We're adding several thousand megawatts of wind and solar. But in the absence of a long-duration battery or in the absence of nuclear, we have to have something for when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. So we have about, in our last electric resource plan, authorization to add about 600 megawatts out of 6,200 megawatts of natural gas that will run something like less than 5% of the time. And so we do believe that it is going to be necessary for some period of time for power generation. We'll do it more cleanly, we'll use it less frequently, and we don't think that it will inhibit our ability to meet our climate goals. And then for home heating and cooling, that's going to be for home heating rather, that's going to be challenging as well, particularly in cold climates. We have a net zero plan for natural gas on our local distribution system as well, to reduce methane emissions, to help our customers use it more efficiently, and then to source certified natural gas so that we can drive down the emissions from what natural gas we will continue to use.
And just, if we had a business plan, national business plan, we would be able to answer that question, and people would feel much more, they knew how long natural gas was going to be part of the picture. Some of the more adventurous environmentalists would feel much safer. And it's worth pointing out also that not all communities have a utility company like Xcel. And while I was governor for 8 years, they were at the front leading the charge to make sure that Colorado was continually on the forefront of innovation and change.
Thank you.
And I think if you look at Germany and what happened in Germany, who was totally dependent on Russian natural gas, and then with the invasion of Ukraine, that was cut off. What happened? Did the industry collapse? Did the home heating? Everyone was so worried about that in Germany. But Europe got together, the Nordic countries, the pipelines are already there, and Germany has not had a crisis, and they certainly have cold winters in Germany. So we have to work together. We have to have a plan, as John just said.
Can I just add one more thing really quickly? I forgot to say, we're also looking at other clean fuels like hydrogen, and we have demonstration projects to see if we can run hydrogen blended in the natural gas system that then makes it cleaner as well. So forgot to mention clean hydrogen, of course.
No, and we're going to have one last question right here.
Okay, I have a question for you that connects the subject that's been circulating at this meeting or this festival about polarization to energy, and that is this. So, Governor Hickenlooper, you probably are aware that when President Trump was elected, the Trump budget was predicting the zeroing out of ARPA-E, the Advanced Research Project Energy, and cutting the energy and efficiency renewable energy budget funding, for example, a National Renewable Energy Lab here in Colorado by 80%. Right now, the United States is one of the best places in the world to be an energy innovator. People are coming from other countries to start companies in the United States because of the Infrastructure Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. How do we sustain in an era of polarization where we can envision that our country's leaders will shift back and forth in their party affiliation between now and 2050 and sustain that progress to make it to the point of a zero energy transition in the business community, government, foreign relations?
So I'll go quickly because I know we're about out of time. This is the only way I've ever found to change somebody's mind about something that's important is not to show them why I'm right or they're wrong, but to really listen to them and hear them. And one of the best ways you can make people feel heard is to work on some sort of planning process. And we've seen this before a million different places. Businesses do it all the time, but we've got to get to the point where this is not a part of this. We cannot afford this to be a partisan issue. We will not succeed in addressing climate change if we don't have Republicans working arm in arm with Democrats. And the only way I can think of is to have meals together. I spent 20 years in the restaurant business and see the effect a beer can have on a conversation. Just one, just one beer. But that ability to hear each other and make people feel validated by being heard, repeating back what you've heard to someone, goes a long way towards getting them to a place where you can have that alignment of self-interest.
So I'll say in the business community, leadership matters, having leaders in place that believe and subscribe to this point of view. So I will say this about myself. I've both served as a regulator, I was a lawyer, I was in private practice. I've been in both the public and private sectors and been doing public policy work in some form.
Is this an announcement you're going to run for Senate?
It is not.
Does that sound like?
It is absolutely not. It's not. No. It's not making any news. It's to just say that, listen, I've seen how good public policy gets made, and it is the allocation of finite resources among disparate groups of stakeholders. And that's how the best public policy gets made. We have an ethos in the company of transparency, humility, and empathy. Being transparent, early interactions, not approaching it as a monopoly and not behaving like a monopolist. And then, the senator said listening and making people feel heard. It was what my mother used to say, you have two ears and one mouth for a reason, listen more than you talk. And it's simple, but it's something that is simple and profound, but it's in short supply. And so it's the type of leadership that I try to bring to the company, and so I think leadership matters.
I also think transparency, as you said, understanding this, getting everyone together because it does affect foreign policy. It is not a Democrat or Republican issue, but we have to really focus on how we can do this. And right now, there's so many different interests going in different directions rather than working together to solve these very critical problems. And time is running out. Jane Fonda, the great expert on what's going on, said we have 5 years before the tipping point comes down. I think she's right.
We're basically wrapped. Because you keep bringing up this national plan, are you calling for a Department of Climate? Is that what you think we need to have?
If that's what it takes, absolutely. I'm not for another agency. We've got plenty of agencies, but I think there needs to be some centralized place where there's responsibility for creating a business plan, right? A timeline, the strengths and weaknesses, how you're going to market to the people so that they believe in it. Mm-hmm. That has to have a central place.
All right. Well, thank you all for this wonderful discussion. Thank you all for your questions and for joining us today. Have a wonderful night.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.